session would examine how people working in different media and targeting different audience engage themselves in a dialogue with their own medium and others. For the present session, may I now call upon stage Mr. Arvind Krishna Mehrotra. Arvind Krishna Mehrotra has published 4 collections of poetry in English, an illustrated history of Indian literature in English. He is the head of the Department of English and Modern European Languages in the University of Allahabad. In 2009, he was nominated for the chair of Professor of Poetry at the University of Oxford. Mr. Arvind Krishna Mehrotra. May I also have the honor of inviting on stage Mr. Mahmood Farooqui. इन्होंने दास्तान गोई और Besieged Voices from Delhi नामक किताबें लिखी हैं. Mr. Mahmood Farooqui जी. May I also call upon Mr. Sanjay Kak, who is a self-taught independent documentary filmmaker. He writes occasional political commentary and is the editor of the book Until My Freedom Has Come, The New Intifad in Kashmir. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sanjay Kak. May I also call upon stage Ms. Madhavi Sardesai. Madhavi Sardesai ji Goa University में कोंकणी पढ़ाती हैं. And now, may I have the pleasure of inviting on the stage the moderator of the session, Mr. Jerry Pinto.
Gentlemen, can you hear me now? Okay, I think we've gotten off to a flying start. Yeah, I think we've gotten off to a flying start in Samanvay with a huge challenge that was posed to all of us by Shamsur Farooqui, who said that through his life, he has only seen language as a space for disruption, a space for hegemony, a space for violence, and a space for trying to establish what one does, a personal practice, as the rule for everybody. In all our traditions, I think, Dr. Sardesai comes from my hometown, Goa, where we are in the process of fighting pitched battles about which language Konkani will be written in, which script it will be written in, whether it will be written in the Kannada script or it will be written in Devanagari or it will be written in the Roman script. You know, cinema filmmakers are constantly being asked, and especially documentary filmmakers, I think, are constantly being asked when they will shift to the bigger language of the fiction film. When are you going to be making your big film? Storytellers are forever being asked when they're going to actually write down their stories instead of just wasting them upon the air. And Arvind, you and I know that poets are never even asked questions because no one even considers whether poetry matters anymore. It's assumed that it's peripheral. So I'm going to ask you all to respond either positively or negatively to what our valedictory speaker said today about language as the space of hegemony, as the space of control, as the space of violence, and then let's try and work our way forward towards a more fluent and fluid understanding of language as a space of play and joy and celebration and communication and just telling other people what it's like to be inside me, which is also what language can do. So shall we start with Arvind over there and work our way down in, say...
Why don't we start with...
Okay.
Yeah, please,
Ma'am, would you like to start off and say, how you responded to Mr. Rahman's thing? Do you have?
Yeah. Am I audible?
I think, yeah, you are. You just have to leave it lying around. You don't have to pick it up.
Yeah. So, maybe since I have to start, so maybe I should start with the story of my own language, that is Konkani. And I won't be starting from the fight.
Yeah, okay, good place not to start.
And maybe I start from one of the points of convergence where I don't see language as breaking, but rather language as joining. Because when Goa, in the wake of liberation of Goa, one of the issues was what happens to the fate of Goa, whether Goa is merged into a bigger community, Maharashtra, or whether Goa remains separate. And somehow the whole issue got centered or got a color of a language versus dialect controversy in Goa. And if we probe into the history of this controversy, then maybe we have to acknowledge the support of people like stalwarts like Kaka Kalelkar, you know, who saw Konkani as the only stage on which people could meet in Goa. Because as it is, the society was all disintegrated, and within one Goa, we had several Goas. And even now we do have, and not that we have to eradicate the difference, but then people were all, there was a sort of a diglossia in Goa, you know, two diglossias in Goa side by side. Christians, they had their own orientation towards languages. Portuguese was perceived as the higher language, and Konkani was a language only to talk to the locals, you know. And for Hindus, Konkani was a language of, it was the language in which everybody was comfortable with. They spoke Konkani at home, but it was not regarded as a language. That was a dialect, you know. So, and the makers of Goa, people who had vision for Goa, they felt that Goa could be built on this very strong foundation of language, you know, and Konkani became this very foundation. So
can I take this now to Arvind? You know, I think Madhavi spoke very beautifully of there being many Goas within Goa. Are there many Hindis within Hindi?
नहीं, मैं हिंदी में बोलूँगा अगर मैं
ज़रूर
मैंने हिंदी में कई बोलियाँ तो हैं जिसका फरूकी साहब जिक्र भी कर रहे थे, पर अंग्रेज़ी के बारे में जिसमें मैं लिखता हूँ और जिसमें मैं अनुवाद करता हूँ, जो दिलचस्प बात है वो ये है कि जब मैंने लिखना शुरू किया 1964-65 में, और मेरे साथ आलोक राय हैं, और हम दोनों ने साथ ही लिखना शुरू किया। हम लोग के घर 64 में भी बगल बगल थे, आज भी बगल बगल हैं, और छोटी सी दीवार थी जिसमें कभी हम इनके यहाँ होते थे, कभी ये हमारे यहाँ होते थे। तो उस समय जब हम लोगों ने लिखना शुरू किया तो उस समय अंग्रेज़ी करीब करीब जाने वाली थी, मतलब अंग्रेज़ी हटाओ का ज़माना था, और यही लोग कहते थे अब तो अंग्रेज़ी समाप्त हो रही है, जा रही है देश से, तुम लोगों ने अंग्रेज़ी में लिखना क्यों शुरू किया है। यूनिवर्सिटी से अंग्रेज़ी को हटाने की बात हो रही थी, हम लोगों की जो मोटर गाड़ियाँ थी उनमें उनका जो नंबर प्लेट थी वो अंग्रेज़ी में थी, वो रातों रात हम लोगों ने उसे हिंदी में उसे लिखा। उसके बाद जब मैं बम्बई पढ़ने गया, वहाँ पे भी यही समस्या आई कि अंग्रेज़ी तो अब समाप्त हो रही है, भारतीय भाषा में क्यों नहीं लिखते हैं। तो एक वो समय था करीब 50 साल पहले जब अंग्रेज़ी जा रही थी, और अब शायद वो कम जा रही है। ये तो नहीं कह रहा हूँ कि एकदम ही जा रही है, पर शायद वो जाने का जो वो अंग्रेज़ी का है वो थोड़ा तो कम हो गया है। पर उसमें तो एक हेजेमनी की लैंग्वेज तो अंग्रेज़ी बनी गई है, इसके बारे में तो कोई दो राय नहीं है। पर अंग्रेज़ी उस हेजेमनी को देखते हुए अंग्रेज़ी की जो अपनी परेशानियां हैं उसके बारे में मैं सिर्फ 2-3 शब्द कहूँगा। उसमें से एक तो ये है कि अंग्रेज़ी की अपनी बोलियां नहीं हैं, और इसीलिए इस भाषा में लिखना ख़ास तौर से भारतीय संदर्भ में कितना कठिन है। और अगर आप उपन्यास लिख रहे हैं तो ये और भी कठिन है आपके लिए, क्योंकि अंग्रेज़ी बोली जाती है सड़कों पे, हम लोग भी अंग्रेज़ी बोलते हैं, पर जो हम अंग्रेजी बोलते हैं, अगर उसमें हम क्लास डिस्टिंक्शंस करना चाहें कि एक जो घर में खाना बनाती है, जो मेहरी है, वो उसके साथ हम एक सीन दिखाएं, डायलॉग दिखाएं नाटक में, या तो अंग्रेजी में कैसे करेंगे? तो जो भारतीय लेखक जो अंग्रेजी में होता है, जो करता है, वो देखिए, मैं जो भाषा जिसे हेजिमोनिक भाषा कहते हैं उसकी समस्या बता रहा हूँ। वो लेखक क्या करता है कि वो उस मेहरी को गलत सलत अंग्रेजी में बुलवाता है। आई डू वॉशिंग टुडे, आई विल नॉट कम टुडे, कुछ इस तरह से मैंने देखा है उपन्यासों में। जब मैं हिंदी में अब किसी पूछता हूँ अपनी मेहरी से तुम क्यों नहीं आई, तो क्या कि गोड़ पे रात रहा। तो अब गोड़ पे रात रहा तो मैं कुछ नहीं, पर अगर मैं लिख रहा हूँ अंग्रेजी में तो मुझे गोड़ पे रात रहा का कुछ तो करना पड़ेगा। तो मेरे पास अंग्रेजी में वो ज़मान नहीं है जिसमें, या वो कहे कि बुकरी हिराई गई। अब बुकरी हिराई गई, मेहरी की बुकरी रोज ही हिराती रहती है। कहने का मतलब कि बकरी मेरी गुम गई तो इसलिए मैं काम पे नहीं आ सकी, शी लॉस्ट अ गोट। अब सवाल ये है कि मुझे बार बार हिंदी से अंग्रेजी में अनुवाद करना पड़ता है और मेरे पास उस अंग्रेजी में उनके लिए कोई शब्द नहीं है। तो ये एक बहुत ही सपाट, इसमें कोई उताव चढ़ाव नहीं है, उस तरह की भाषा है। जब हम लोग इंडियन पोम्स इन इंग्लिश, जैसे निस्से में ज़कील ने लिखा, तो एक मजाक के तौर पे हम लोग इंडियन इंग्लिश को उसका प्रयोग कर सकते हैं, पर उस हेजिमोनिक भाषा को हम किसी लिखने के संदर्भ में एक कॉमिक फॉर्म के अलावा उसका कोई और उपयोग नहीं है। तो एक ये हेजिमोनिक भाषा का जो पहलू है, मैं इसके बारे में ये कह रहा था।
So if I could take this now to Mahmood Farooqui, just as we've heard that English has been going, we also keep hearing that Urdu is going, Urdu is dying. And every time I turn around, I find that there are more and more people who respond very almost viscerally to the pull of Urdu, whether it's in the form of Hindi film lyrics or it is shairi, which people now exchange over Twitter. Over Twitter or even on their cell phones or their WhatsApp. Except of course that fewer and fewer people are actually reading Urdu or speaking Urdu. So when you do something like Dastan Goy, is there an agenda in it to take Urdu somewhere that it has not been for a long time, which is in the realm of the story? Because as far as I can see, Urdu seems to be locked into romance as a tradition, just as much as Indian English is locked into the comic form, as Mehrotra was saying.
Yeah, I mean, that at the immediate level, to respond to that, yes, there is a kind of an inescapable...
Can you hear?
...romantic association that Urdu, a connotation of romance that Urdu has and has enjoyed, in part thanks to cinema, which has also sort of kept it alive at many levels, I mean, the work I do is actually just a presentation on stage of all the scholarship that Farooqui Sahab has done, And I hope one day a moment will come and I can say कि मैं भी एक छोटा मोटा फारूकी साहब हूँ, पर मुझे अब एहसास हो रहा है कि छोटा मोटा फारूकी साहब बनने के लिए भी बहुत बड़ा आदमी बनना पड़ता है, तो वो शायद मेरे बस में नहीं हो पाएगा, पर वो it's the scholarship that he has done, which scholarship in today's times operates in a much more attenuated literary culture. This kind of scholarship 40 years ago would have had a much wider reach, a reach outside the language also perhaps, but now it has got kind of circumscribed in a way, because the literary culture certainly has kind of become, I mean, it's vibrant and it's extremely resilient, but it is no longer as dense and as widespread as it was before 47, when Urdu was there as a kind of did enjoy a kind of a hegemonic position in North India at least. Having said that, our work, although we work in traditions of stories which sometimes are an extremely kind of Persianized idiom and therefore very difficult to access for a lay audience today, at the same time, it still manages to convey itself to the audience partly because of our performance, partly because of our gesticulation, and partly because people in general across North India, in Bombay, in Bangalore, are much more willing to digest difficult Urdu than difficult Bengali, let us say. There is a prestige, there is a kind of a aura, there is a kind of a pre-established sort of I mean, this is a tendentious word because Urdu has been associated with elitism, but there is a certain kind of a high culture that is associated with it that helps us in our work. We work with stories and we work in a form which came into being when there was a harmony between the performer and the audience at the linguistic level, at the level of the stories and the narrative, and also in terms of the expectations of performance. People knew what the performer was doing, so they could appreciate nuances. So now when we tell the same stories on the stage, we are sort of functioning in a space which is the modern stage, which is the modern theater. But we are throwing things at an audience which are very strange. So it works both ways. तो हम अगर हमारी ज़बान ज़रा और आसान हो तो ज़्यादा लोगों को समझ में आएगा यकीनन, पर वो आसान ज़बान हम कहाँ खोजने जाएं, क्योंकि हम जो हम आधुनिक हिंदी लिखते हैं उसको भी आम आदमी आसानी से समझ नहीं सकता। दिल्ली में बैठ के मैं आपको हरियाणवी में कोई चीज़ सुनाऊं तो उसको भी आदमी नहीं समझ सकता। मैं अगर आज आपको तुलसीदास सुनाने बैठूं तो उसको भी आप नहीं समझ सकते। मैं आपसे कहूं आप सूरदास सुनाना चाहता हूं तो सूरदास को भी आप नहीं समझ सकते। तो नॉर्थ इंडियन लिंग्विस्टिक स्केप में हम जो ऑपरेट कर रहे हैं उसमें कोई क्लासिसिज्म हमारे पास बचा ही नहीं है। अगर हम स्ट्रीट पाटवा में कोई चीज़ तैयार करना चाहते हैं स्टेज पे सुनाने के लिए, तो हम जो देखते हैं जो काम हुआ है बॉम्बे सिनेमा में, वो एक इजी क्लीशे टपोरी ज़बान है। उसमें भी कोई ऐसा स्ट्रीट पाटवा बॉम्बे सिनेमा ने भी अपना ईजाद नहीं किया है जो उर्दू डायलॉग से बाहर हो। वो अभी भी उर्दू डायलॉग के तहत ऑपरेट कर रहा है। तो ये ज़बान की परेशानी जो है वो सिर्फ हमारी परेशानी नहीं है, वो इस बात की परेशानी है कि लोग क्या समझ सकते हैं और लोग क्या बोलते हैं और किस ज़बान में हम उन्हें कोई स्टोरी सुनाएं जिसमें कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी भी हो, जिसमें ज़बान की भी पेचीदगी हो, जिसमें इमेजरी भी हो और मेटाफर भी हो और वो सारी चीज़ें हों जो लिटरेरी क्वालिटीज़ होती हैं, और साथ ही साथ उसमें कम्युनिकेबिलिटी भी हो। तो ये बड़ा एक मुश्किल सवाल है, ये सिर्फ हमारे लिए नहीं है। आज के दौर में मतलब मोहन राकेश 1960 में नाटक लिख के चले गए, पर 1990 में और 2005 में तो वो नाटक हिंदी में नहीं लिखे जा रहे हैं जो उसको हम स्टेज कर सकें और जिन्हें लोग समझ सकें।
You know, it's interesting because you keep saying जो लोग समझ सकें, but then the question is, who is this log? You know, what audience exactly are you talking about? Because everyone inside their head knows that there is a literary audience and there is an audience. No? Now with cinema, I think, you know, what the assumption generally is that the audience is this multi-hydra-headed person who is willing to take anything you throw at him, mainly because it is a combination of the image and the word. And this image and word has such potency that cinema is obviously going to take over the, you know, the totality of our discourses. It's going to erase the book. Everyone will be watching cinema. That was what they said 50 years ago. Hasn't happened. Books have survived. And we've come to the place where increasingly we seem to recognize that even a film has to begin somewhere with a word or with a series of words in the form of a script. Perhaps this is not quite so much for documentary. Sanjay, would you like to come in on that?
No, I think as a documentary filmmaker, which is what I'll try and represent myself here as, I think that unlike the debates that go on platforms like these, I don't think there has been a better time for the documentary film. You know, I've been working for 30 years and I cannot remember a time when there were more people making films, there were more people screening films, there were more people watching films.
And even the technology has helped.
Yeah, and of course technology has, you know, helped to democratize it. But I think that, and I'm going to stick to my discipline, so to speak,
sure,
because there might be a parable that other people can use. You see, one of the best things that has happened to Indian documentary is that it has never received formal state support.
Sure.
Unlike, for example, a language like Hindi, which has had a very curious flirtation with state support and this whole business of the, you know. So, because the history of the contemporary Indian documentary is in a sense a kind of adversarial relationship, I think that the absence of funding meant that filmmakers had to develop a relationship with their audience. And I think if there is anything that distinguishes documentary film practice in India today, it is that relationship with the audience. I mean, I remember as an undergraduate in 1977, watching Anand Patwardhan arrive with a 16mm projector and a reel of Prisoners of Conscience, and we didn't know what to make of this. We had never experienced this phenomenon, you know, an independent film about political prisoners, and remember this is 1977. So I think that unlike, say, the New Cinema movement, which there was the Film Finance Corporation, then there was the National Film Development Corporation, which ensured that films were made. And you would know in the 80s and 90s how many films were made, some of them of exceptional quality. But the state was not interested in creating that relationship with the audience. It was only at one level interested in absorbing the filmmakers, and in another sort of way appearing to be the benevolent patron of the arts. So I think that documentary filmmakers from 1977 till today have had to work very, very hard in order to literally create a one-to-one relationship with your audience. You know, and you refer to technology. I think that the digital projector and the DVD and you know all that has helped. What that means is that there is now the possibility of a diversity of film practice, which has multiple audiences in mind. I don't think anybody is writing to receive accolades from the Sahitya Academy. You know,
Sure.
I don't think anybody is making films necessarily because they want to get the National Film Award.
Sure.
Some films will, and some people will. But there has not been a hegemonic practice in documentary film. And I think that is, if I were to think of one reason why I am suggesting a kind of vitality to the practice, I think that would be it. That in this kind of unstructured way, there was space.
Great, and I think what that brings into play very efficiently is the role of, you know, who's got the money to do this, who's funding it, where does this funding come from? So, Dr. Sardesai, would you like to start by talking, what do you think the role of, say, the Konkani Sahitya Academy, the Goa government, or even the Department of Konkani, in which you head in the University of Goa, what has that role been in linking languages or in separating them? What is the role of the state? Has the state played an active and an interesting role in the development of Konkani?
Yeah, I feel.
You should take that.
Hello?
Much better.
Yeah.
Keep it close.
Actually, Konkani is a very special case, you know, because when before the liberation, Portuguese was the dominant language, both socially as well as politically, and it was also the language of administration. So when the Portuguese left, there was a hope that the place of Portuguese would be taken by Konkani, but somehow there was a leveling of this colonial heritage, and Goa inherited India's colonial heritage, and Goa also became English somehow.
Yeah.
Then identities changed. Then Pedro became Peter, you know. Then so even the
João
names,
became
yeah,
John,
João became John, and then somehow Goa became English, and then Konkani was always there, but there was no state support for Konkani. So whatever Konkani has got so far has always been by fighting and coming on the streets.
Okay.
You know, and right now Konkani is the state language, but as many people say, there is Raj Mukut on Konkani, but no Rajdand, you know. So the queen still remains English. English rules, but Konkani is the state language. So, and there is somehow, you know, I feel when there was no obvious state support for Konkani, there was more vitality in the Konkani speech community, because people used to come out and then they used to do something. So now what the government does it, if, okay, you want to publish the book, take this money, publish the book. Then if the book is published without government support, government buys copies, and there is not much vitality. This is something which pains me. But still, the Konkani language movement is there. Maybe I should...
I think that's, you know, but what I think I'm fascinated by is, you know, there we have the original with Alok Rai of the first of the people who took the language out onto the streets with Damn You and Ezra and whatnot. So in those moments when, there was no Samanvay festival, what was translation like as an activity when no one's supporting anything? I mean, never mind English. Now we talk of the hegemony of English, but English, as you just pointed out, Arvind, English at that time was the thing that was dying or was fading. So what was it like to bring out an English language magazine, cyclo-styled, stapled and sold on the streets of Bombay by presenting it to hapless passers-by?
हाँ नहीं, अंग्रेजी में एक छोटी पत्रिका जैसे लघु पत्रिका कहते हैं हम लोग, वो निकालना जो हम लोग 8 आने की बेचते थे, जो 8 आने जो आजकल चलती भी नहीं है, पर लोग पूछते थे कि एक तो डैम यू का क्या मतलब होता है या कुछ कहते थे डैम यू, पर उन्हें कुछ समझ में नहीं आता था कि हम लोग क्या करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, और हम लोग को शायद खुद भी समझ में नहीं आता था कि हम लोग क्या करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। हम लोग इसलिए शायद निकालते थे क्योंकि आलोक राय के घर में एक साइक्लो स्टाइलिंग मशीन थी जिसमें हंस प्रकाशन का कुछ ना कुछ निकलता रहता था, और वो हम लोगों के हाथ लग गई, और एक इनके पिता का अमृत राय का टाइपराइटर हम लोगों के हाथ लग गया, उस पर हम लोग निकालते थे। पर इतना ज़रूर था कि अंग्रेज़ी में कुछ नहीं समझते, लोग समझते थे कि क्या हो रहा है, पर हिंदी में बहुत सारी लघु पत्रिकाएँ निकल रही थी 60s और 70s में, तो बंगाल में निकल रही थी। तो एक तरह से उस समय खासतौर से लिटिल मैगजीन्स में कहीं ना कहीं वो हंग्री जनरेशन था, और हिंदी में तो खैर बहुत सारी निकल रही थी, तो एक एक्सचेंज होता था, एक आदान प्रदान होता था लिटिल मैगजीन्स का, और विदेशों में बहुत चलन था लिटिल मैगजीन्स का, तो हम लोग अपनी मैगजीन भेजते थे और वहाँ से उनकी मैगजीन आती थी। तो ये एक बड़ी अजीब सी स्थिति थी कि हम लोग चाहे हुए 8 आने में एक डैम यू निकालते थे, पर लगता था कि हम लोग सारे भारतवर्ष से और सारी दुनिया से किसी न किसी तरह से जुड़े हुए हैं। और आलोक राय बताते हैं कि जब वो यूनिवर्सिटी कॉलेज गए और उन्होंने डैम यू उनके रखी हुई उनके लाइब्रेरी में, तो उन्होंने कहा कि मैं देख सकता हूँ, तो इन्हें अपने हाथ में सफ़ेद दस्ताने पहनने पड़े, तब उन्होंने जाके इन्हें डैम यू दिखाई, किसी लॉकर, किसी टेम्परेचर कंट्रोल्ड लॉकर में से निकाल के।
लवली फीलिंग।
सो तो हम इसके बारे में दूसरी बात ये भी है कि हमारा पुराना साहित्य तो लुप्त हो ही गया है, पर जो 60 और 70 की जो लघु पत्रिकाएं हैं वो भी हिंदी में और अंग्रेज़ी में वो भी काफ़ी हद तक लुप्त हो गई हैं। अगर विदेशी लाइब्रेरीज़ में कुछ बची हों तो बची हों, पर यहाँ पे तो हमारे ख्याल से कोई भी लाइब्रेरी नहीं है जिसके पास बड़ौदा से वृश्चिक का एक कंप्लीट सेट हो, या जो स्वामीनाथन ने एक पत्रिका निकाली थी कॉन्ट्रा, जिसके केवल 4 इश्यूज निकले थे, उसका किसी के पास कहीं हो। तो जब हम लोग इन सब चीज़ों के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं तो शायद इसके बारे में भी कभी सोचें कि जो चीज़ें 100 साल या 200 साल पहले की, जो 50 साल पहले जो थी, वो अब कितनी दुर्लभ हो गई हैं।
So I'll take that to you, Mahmood. What has been the role of the state in the support of Urdu? And would you agree with what Dr. Sardesai said, that when the state tries to support it, it does it so ham-handedly that it actually reduces the vitality of a language?
I think speaking for Urdu, it has generally been well known that, after 47, from North India across schools where Urdu was taught, it was removed from those schools, and it became more and more difficult to actually study and read Urdu in the schools, even for people who wanted to opt for it. As things stand today, I mean, every government that comes in obviously promises to do things for Urdu. It's one of those standard things, doing things for Muslims, doing things for Urdu. So we'll do something, we'll form a body. There is bodies across North India, in every capital, there is a body to promote Urdu, and there is a body to promote Urdu. But obviously, as as she's saying, most of them are fossilized. At the same time, there is some support. I mean, there is a national council which publishes some classics or gives some support. It's not an ideal scenario, but it is support that Urdu could do with, I think, Left to itself, it'll be tottering a bit more. That's things stand. But that is because not just, it's a language which has been deliberately emasculated. It's not a linguistic scenario which is developed naturally. So when you've taken those steps to actually damage a language or damage it at its fount, then a little bit of oxygen at the top obviously is not going to revitalize it in any meaningful fashion. but it allows some writers, some perks, or some little thing, allows cliques to develop and keeps people interested in a kind of a, who was published in which magazine and who was published in which magazine and who wrote one for whom and who got the awards. So, I mean, but those are common things across literary cultures, I think.
Can you hear? The mic, your mic, I think, okay. I think just to ask one last question, I mean, not, but a connected question, which I'll also take to Sanjay later, is it that Urdu suffers from an association with being Muslim as a language?
Oh, undoubtedly, absolutely. Of course it did. It was stigmatized as the language which caused partition, and therefore there were definitely, there was definitely a very strong antagonistic air against Urdu, and it has been well documented. So, Hindi cinema is 100 years old, but the roots of Urdu go back 200 years. I mean, when a man like, and it goes back to Parsi theatre, it goes back to the taste for Nautanki, which always had Urdu ghazals, which were always performed in the villages as well, and it's exemplified in that great short story which was turned into a film, Mare Gaye Gulfam, which was made into the Raj Kapoor film, Tisri Qasam. It is about a singer who travels from village to village, and she is singing in Urdu, obviously, and people know that song. Mare Gaye Gulfam is obviously an Urdu line, So there is a taste for Urdu and there is a taste for its poetry which goes back a long time ago. When a Mughal prince in 1820s, Mirza Asfari, travels across India and goes to Rajasthan, then goes across to Orissa, then travels down and then travels to Kerala. In most parts he can make himself understood because he's speaking in Urdu. And there has been an older presence of it. And that echoes in your head, and it is there in our poetry. I mean, our medieval Hindi poetry with its dohas, Kabir Das and Tulsi Das and Sur Das and Jayasi, their interplay with Farsi has been well documented. So it is, I mean, the influence of Farsi on all our North Indian languages is also something which has been documented. So there is a taste for Urdu, there is an ear for Urdu, there is a hankering for Urdu which has remained in spite of attempts to crush it.
Yeah, I remember B.D. Garga telling me that, film scholar B.D. Garga, when I visited him in Goa, in fact, he told me that he was educated in English and in Urdu. He could not read, our preeminent film scholar could not read Devanagari titles on the screen.
Well, I mean, Lala Lajpat Rai was a great proponent of the Hindi movement, and he couldn't read any Hindi either,
So, I wanted to consider there's one way in which we've looked at this, this notion of Urdu as being linked to Islam. There's also the notion, in some senses, of the documentary movement as being left-leaning and liberal. And does that in any way, construct a certain audience which...
Yeah. Actually, if I can just link with
Sure.
what Mahmood was saying, the word hegemony has been used. Farooqui Saab, the senior, used it, and Farooqui Saab, the junior, also used it. But I think hegemony, hegemony is like Russian dolls. There are hegemonies within hegemonies.
Sure.
I mean, if I were to look at the example of Urdu in Kashmir, Sheikh Abdullah, who many will see as the preeminent sort of creator of the notion of Kashmir, he was very brutal with Kashmiri. From 1955, from the 50s onwards, Kashmiri was simply not taught in Kashmir at all, because he had a notion that Urdu was the language. So if there was a hegemonic language in Kashmir after 1947, then Urdu was the hegemonic language, and in collusion with a certain elite. Yeah. And so to be cultured and to belong to a high culture meant you belong to Urdu culture. Yeah. So the directors of education in Kashmir from 1950 till I don't know when, were always Urdu speakers, at grave cost to the Kashmiri language. But I wanted to say that I think that for the documentary film, I think that because in some senses it's not that it's without language, but it's not embedded in a particular language. There is an autonomy that the image and sound gives. So,
but may I just jump in here with the question of subtitling?
Yes.
Because when you're subtitling, say, the boli of or the dialect of someone who is from Chhattisgarh, you're talking, the person is speaking about his experiences there. Is there anything that you keep in mind? Is there anything that you have to bear in mind?
No, of course, but there is also a vast audience who can't read at all.
Right.
So if I do a film and I do 2 versions, I always do that. So you have one in English and one in Hindi. But I'm not certain that even my Hindi speakers can read Hindi subtitles.
Sure.
So actually, what I really want to talk about is that as a filmmaker, for me the challenge is that how do you find a terrain where you are dealing with the political, but you are not principally embedded in language and reading. That how do you, of course it's critical in my films that you read the subtitles accurately, as I'm sure for most filmmakers.
Sure.
But even if you can't, then what is it that the audience is going to take away? So I think that we still have that huge gap in that, you know, say even in the Hindi-speaking belt, people, of course, they can read Hindi, but can a lot of people read Hindi subtitles as fast as you demand of them?
Yeah.
You know, because that's
Sure.
a skill, a training, and so on.
Yeah.
So I think that it's not that as filmmakers we are shying away from the use of language and the accurate translation and subtitle of language, but I think you're also trying to arrive at a mode where you do come away with quite a lot, even if you are not, if you are released from the textuality of it.
Sure.
You know, so
I'd just like to, I mean, both of you could respond to this, but I remember going to Kashmir, to Srinagar for a Buckaroo performance, you know, children's literature, and so they decided to also do Dastangoi there. So 2 young men from Bombay had come and were doing Dastangoi. And the students were completely lost because they were Kashmiri speaking and they'd never heard Urdu and they never understood Urdu. So finally at the end, we asked them to do a performance just for us, for the readers, for the writers. And that worked beautifully because we were trying. But children will immediately pull the plug and turn away. So I don't know whether, Sanjay, this helps. I mean, because I think it means that Kashmiri is staging some kind of very strong comeback, at least in the Delhi public school, which seems to be fairly elitist even in, I mean, it is elitist.
it's probably not Kashmiri, but English, which people are more comfortable with in a school like that.
Okay. So would any of you now, I mean, I'm very happy to take questions from the audience, but please not statements and not perorations, and please direct your question at one member of the panel who will be very happy, I'm sure, to answer. Otherwise, we can keep on gabbing. I mean, these are very interesting people. I'd be happy to talk to them all evening. But you have 15 minutes left, so I'd like to be democratic and open Samanvay's first panel discussion to the audience as well. Do I see any hands? I'm sorry, this light is blinding me. So if someone, Giriraj or Satyanand, you would take the mic around. I don't know. Sorry.
There's a question.
Okay, there's a question over there. Right. Can someone get him the mic, or will you shout, sir?
I'll try and shout.
Right.
I'll try and shout. The question that I have is, we're talking about preserving Indian languages. We're talking about preserving Indian languages, the way they are. Now, my question is this: Do you not think? I mean, I'm sorry that I can't direct this question to a single individual. It's generally for the panel out here.
Sure.
The question that I have is: don't you think that a language that's more liberal in its attitude, meaning the people who speak that language has a better chance of survival? Because I primarily believe that English, for one, we're talking about hegemony. The hegemony exists because English has this capacity to adapt. Unfortunately, the other languages, even languages like French, they're so stuck inside their own mold that they've not been able to grow, and they're disappearing slowly vis-a-vis English. So this is the question that I have, that with an Indian language...
Great, thank you. I think the question is, we've got it. So one, I think preserving languages is not really the question in general, because what you want to do is encourage the language and let it grow. Fundamentally, you don't preserve anything except if it's an artifact in a museum. You're quite right. But would you like, ma'am, to take that question first? Sorry.
अंग्रेजी क्या
Inherently more adaptable.
हाँ, मतलब अंग्रेजी इतनी ज़्यादा अडेप्टेबल है कि जो अक्सर जो भारतीय लिखते हैं वो समझ में भी नहीं आता है, कम से कम मेरे समझ में तो नहीं आता है। और मैं रोज़ कटिंग्स निकालता हूँ, जिसे वो राहुल गांधी क्या कहता, कंप्लीट नॉनसेंस, ऐसा कुछ कहा था उसने ना कुछ दिन पहले, द कंप्लीटली नॉनसेंसिकल स्टेटमेंट्स। और मैं आपको रोज़, आप हिंदू में ख़ास तौर से जो लिटरेरी रिव्यूज़ हैं, लिटरेरी रिव्यूज़ की जो भाषा है अंग्रेज़ी में, वो इतनी ज़्यादा अडेप्टेबल हो गई है कि मैं आपको 20 रिव्यूज़ अभी इस समय सुना सकता हूँ, अगर आप एक मिनट दें। ये तो मैं लाया हूँ, सुनाने के लिए लाया हूँ मैं, तो ऐसे ये देखिए, ये हिंदू में से है, द अडेप्टेबल इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज। ये हिमांशु मोहपात्रा एक उड़िया उपन्यास का रिव्यू लिख रहे हैं। ये उपन्यास है उमेश चंद्र सरकार का,
हिमांशु मोहपात्रा ने लिखा है,
उड़िया नॉवल पे, ये हिंदू में से है। इसे सुनिए आप, अडेप्टेबल इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज। द इंग्लिश ट्रांसलेशन ऑफ दिस फर्स्ट फ्रूट फ्रॉम द लेट फ्लावरिंग ट्री ऑफ उड़िया प्रोज अलाउज अ पीक इनटू उड़िया नॉवेल्स डार्विनियन पास्ट। किसी के समझ में आए? मैं दोबारा पढ़ के सुना सकता हूँ
प्लीज।
कि ये The English translation of this first fruit from the late flowering tree of Odia prose allows a peek into Odia novel's Darwinian past.
वाह।
नहीं और नहीं, मैं तो शाम भर निकल जाएगी, मैं इसी तरह की अंग्रेजी अडेप्टेबल इंग्लिश ही सुनाता रहूंगा आप लोगों को।
But you can pay $100 each and
तो
Mehrotra will give you an evening of adaptable English just outside here.
That it's not, to assume that, how do people speak what they speak? Either they learn it at home, or they learn it on the streets, or they learn it in schools. There is a power being exerted behind which language they are using and how they are using it. That power is coming in the form of the media, that power is coming in the form of the billboards, in the form of the newspapers. What their peers in school think is a language worth speaking, what the boss thinks is a language worth speaking. So they're hearing things. Language is not just something that is there in your ear that you are born with, I mean, there's a famous saying, a dialect is a language with an army. So, I mean, it's not, English is adaptable because it has had, obviously, it has had a colonial empire which it has benefited from, I mean, so it would not be so flexible and so adaptable if it didn't have that colonial empire. So there is a issue of power associated with language, and which languages survive and which languages do not survive.
And I just want to point out that Marathi scholars will tell you Marathi is 40% Arabic. Okay,
Persian must be
Persian and Arabic. Because those were the trade routes. If you live on a coast, you talk to your traders, right? Yeah. And I think Setu Madhavrao Pagdi says that at one point Marathi was spoken from Delhi to Tanjavur. And ask yourself why? Because your trade links again are there. Yeah. So now if your trading partner is going to speak English, you're going to speak English. That's another of those. And tomorrow, we'd all better be learning Mandarin, I think. Your children should go to Mandarin classes. Arpita, make sure. Yeah, over there. Mic पहुंचाएंगे आप? Thank you.
मेरा सवाल ये था कि अभी जो बात हो रही है पूरी की जुबानें जोड़ेंगी आपस में, लैंग्वेज जोड़ेंगी, लेकिन हमारे देश की हिस्ट्री रही है कि हमारी आज़ादी के बाद जो हमारे देश में राज्य बने वो भाषाओं के आधार पे ही बने।
जरूर।
और दूसरी बात ये आती है कि तकलीफ में सारी भाषाएं हैं, तकलीफ में सारी बोलियां हैं, और एक ही तरीका है संवाद करने का कि हम आपस में बैठ के बात करें। क्योंकि जितने भी यहाँ पे बहुत सारे लोग ऐसे हैं जिनकी इंग्लिश अच्छी है, जिनकी हिंदी अच्छी है, जिनकी उर्दू अच्छी है, जिनकी संस्कृत अच्छी है, अगर ये लोग अपने आसपास के बच्चों को जिनसे बातचीत करते हैं, अगर उनको सिखाने की कोशिश करें, अगर कोई मुझे उर्दू सिखाता है तो मुझे उर्दू बोलने में कोई दिक्कत नहीं, मुझे अच्छा लगेगा कि मुझे एक भाषा और आ रही है। तो ये सीखने सिखाने की प्रक्रिया अगर शुरू होती है तो शायद ये दायरा थोड़ा बड़ा होगा।
Sure. At one point, you remember the government of India had each one teach
come
one.
into this immediately,
Sure.
this phrase, अगर मुझे उर्दू बोलने में कोई दिक्कत हो रही है, वो एक्चुअली आप उर्दू ही बोल रहे हैं। क्योंकि हुआ क्या है कि 47 के बाद से उर्दू को बना दिया गया है कि जो मुश्किल फारसी लफ्ज है वो उर्दू है। हम आए हैं यहाँ पे और हम बैठे हैं और हम खाना खा रहे हैं, ये तो 200 साल पहले उर्दू शायरों ने बांधा था। तो ये उर्दू कहाँ गई? उर्दू तो वो रह गई जो उर्दू वो बन गई है हिंदुस्तान में कि वो वर्ड जो आपको समझ में नहीं आ रहा है वो उर्दू है। चाल चलन क्या है? वो तो उर्दू है, मगर उठना बैठना क्या है? ये उठना और बैठना जब मिल जाते हैं तो एक अलग लफ्ज बनता है ना। इस अलग लफ्ज के मानी कहां से पैदा हुए? वो मानी तो घिस घिस के उर्दू शायरों ने निकाले हैं ना, कि चलते हो तो चवन को चलिए, चलते हो तो चलिए, ये किसने बनाया है? ये तो घिस घिस के उर्दू ने बनाया है। पर 47 के बाद से आपने क्या किया कि उर्दू का जो सारा साम्राज्य था वो आपने कह दिया ये तो हिंदी है, और जो मुश्किल अल्फाज बचे जो हमारी समझ में नहीं आ रहे हैं वो उर्दू है। तो ये तो साहब, ये तो कमाल की बात है। और उसके बाद आप कह देते हैं कि उर्दू बड़ी मुश्किल है, हमको समझ में नहीं आ रही है, क्योंकि आपने उसकी जो सारे जो सारा जो उसका जो पूरा बेस है, देखिए, चल निकलना, चलते चलते, चले आओ, चले जाओ, चाल चलन, हर एक लफ्ज चाल से या चलने से इतनी बातें निकली ना, ये सब मुहावरे हैं। ये मुहावरे किसने पैदा किए? ये सब मुहावरे तो हिंदी की झोली में आ गए। बाकी जो बच के रह गया, जो हमको समझ में नहीं आ रहा, वो उर्दू हो गई। तो ये तो डबल ज्यादती हो रही ना, मतलब आप इधर से भी मारिए, उधर से भी मारिए, और फिर ये भी कह दीजिए कि ये तो उर्दू ही नहीं है।
Correct. That's what I was saying. That is locked into a kind of romantic assumption. Yeah, there's a gentleman over there. And there's
क्या हम इसको पूरे जो आपने बात कही, इसको 19वीं सदी में जो कुछ घटित हुआ उस नज़रिए से हम देख सकते हैं? दरअसल 19वीं सदी को जब हम याद करते हैं, हिंदी के स्कॉलर या उर्दू के स्कॉलर तो इस रूप में याद करते हैं कि भाई एक कॉमन जुबान थी, उसको अंग्रेज़ों ने हमको फूट डालो राज करो की नीति से लड़ा दिया और अलग कर दिया। तो इसमें पहला क्वेश्चन तो मेरा ये है कि हमारे जो पूर्वज थे, हिंदी के और उर्दू के पूर्वज, जो उस वक्त हिंदी और उर्दू की लड़ाइयाँ लड़ रहे थे, तो क्या वो इतने सीधे थे, इतने भले मानस थे कि उनको ये बात समझ में ही नहीं आई कि हमको लड़ाया जा रहा है? तो मुझे लगता है कि इसमें एक पूरी साजिश है एक ख़ास तबके की। क्या इसको इस नज़र से देख सकते हैं कि जो लोग हिंदी को बचाने के पक्ष में थे वो हिंदू धर्म की बड़ी संस्थाओं से जुड़े हुए थे, जो लोग उर्दू को बचाने के पक्ष में थे वो मुसलमानों की शुद्धि आंदोलन वगैरह बहुत सारी संस्थाओं से जुड़े हुए थे। फिर इसका आगे विकास चरण इस रूप में हमको दिखाई देता है कि हिंदी का जो स्वरूप सत्ता में स्थापित होता है, जो साहित्य में स्थापित होता है, जो हिंदी विभाग बनते हैं, उनमें एक खास जाति और एक तबके का वर्चस्व रहता है जो आज तक जारी है, और लगातार उन्होंने हिंदी और उर्दू के बीच की खाई को चौड़ा किया है। तो क्या इस नज़र से हम देख सकते हैं कि उस तबके की वर्चस्व की वजह से एक सामान्य भाषा, एक कॉमन भाषा दूर होती चली गई और हमारे दिलों में न केवल भाषा के स्तर पर बल्कि समाज में भी खाइयाँ बढ़ी हैं?
हाँ बेशक, मगर इस सवाल का ज्यादा बड़ा जवाब यहाँ वो आलोक राय बैठे हैं, फारूकी साहब बैठे हैं।
Alok Rai, would you like to come in on that
yes,
question?
Alok Rai should come into this question.
I think it's nice to open it out to even the audience to answer questions. So आप जरा माइक आलोक राय जी को दीजिएगा। हाँ, वहाँ बैठे हैं। Very good.
आज मैं
Serves you right. No, you just talk now.
आज मैं गुजराती के बारे में बोलूँगा।
अच्छा, गुजराती के बारे में बोलिए और गुजराती में बोलिए। शू।
नहीं, देखिए, अच्छा ठीक है, हाँ, आप जो कह रहे हैं बिल्कुल सच है, और ये कि हिंदी और उर्दू के दिग्गज जितने भोले नहीं थे, वो अपना दांव पेच खेल रहे थे। अंग्रेज तो बाद में आता है। ये दांव पेच, ये हमारी अपनी राजनीति थी जिसने कि दो भाषाओं को जना, दो भाषाओं को बनाया एक भाषा से, उसको तोड़ने का काम हमने किया है। और ये अंग्रेज तो बहुत काम की चीज़ है ना, कि जब भी ज़रूरत पड़ती तो हम कहते हैं कि वो अंग्रेज है, उसने किया था। सरकार हमारी गलती नहीं है, वो है, उनको पकड़िए। तो वो नहीं है, हम हैं, दोषी हम हैं। लेकिन इसके बारे में हमने कुछ लिखा है विस्तार से, अभी इन लोगों को सुनिए।
No, it's also, very simple question. एक टिकट है विदेश जाने के लिए, okay? 50 भाषाएं हैं, लड़ेंगे नहीं तो क्या? If there's only one ticket to go abroad, okay, for a conference in Amsterdam, okay, where you have a nice red light district and you have free, like legal marijuana, everyone's going to fight for it. That's the problem. Culture generally ends up, the army never has to organize bake sales in order to raise money. But cultural people always end up fighting over small, silly things. And it's unfortunate because we should be bigger than that, right? We should be better than that. But tomorrow someone on this panel will get an award and I'll be very jealous. It's like, it will happen. Now what do you do about that? It's as simple as that. We're human beings also. That's also part of being a writer. You're human. So one of the things is to say our common humanity and our shared wealth of language, and another is to say नहीं उसको Copenhagen भेजा गया क्योंकि उसका दोस्त आलोक राय है, मेरे को नहीं भेजा वो. What? I mean, that's also part of the way the world works. Yeah. And to imagine that Bhasha is outside that, or that writers are outside that, or any creative person is outside that, is also naive, is also bholapan. Yeah? Okay. There was a question up there, I think, in the back seats.
I think Vishwajyoti Ghosh had a question.
Huh. There is a cartoonist among us.
Yes.
I mean, a graphic novelist, as they say nowadays. Graphic novelist जी आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे? बंगाली में कहिए ज़रूर. You know, just add another layer to everything.
He's left.
He's left, I think.
Didn't find our session interesting enough.
Okay, so that generally must mean that we are boring everybody. And it is 45 minutes, which is the time that was allocated to us. We thank you very much for your
just a minute, please.
Sorry, yeah.
हाँ, एक सवाल मेरा है, ये शब्द और अर्थ के संबंधों को ये आप कैसे देखते हैं? और दूसरी बात ये है कि शब्द और अर्थ और इन दोनों के बदलते संदर्भ जो हैं वो मौजूदा समय में किस तरह का परिवर्तन उत्पन्न कर रहे हैं और वो किसके पक्ष में ये सारा का सारा विमर्श जा रहा है?
I have the feeling कि ये एक PhD इसके बारे में लिखा तो कम होगा, but if anyone wants to try and give it a quick 10-minute answer,
Professor Mehrotra.
You know, I'm not even sure I understood, otherwise I would have tried to explain the difference, I mean the relationship between Shabd and Arth. But yes, there is a whole theory of meaning which says that that the meaning of a word is in constant misuse, abuse and use. So it happens, every word that you use will constantly be changing its temperature, its color and its pressure, simply because the user will be changing it and the listener will be changing it. I don't know if I've answered your question, but it's a lovely question with which to stop this. And please, when you meet these gentlemen outside buying books or having chai, please collar them and ask them that question. Thank you all very much.
Thanks a lot. Yes.